Welcome, everybody. Our guest today is André Santos. André is a partner at Bain& Company in South America. He specifically works in the private equity practice. Andrés is a Portuguese, a citizen of the world. You speak 3 languages. You live in Brazil. André, I like always to kick off these conversations first. If you can tell me a little bit more about you and just really what brought you to the Americas.
Sure. So glad to be here. As you mentioned, I'm a partner in Bain at our São Paulo office, where I joined in 2009. I coordinate our efforts in transport and logistics, and at the same time, I'm very focused on M&A, both with corporate clients and with private equity investors, financial investors. I joined in 2009, so that was the year that we were going through a big crisis. I was doing my MBA at the time. Brazil was taking off. There was no crisis in Brazil at the time. I spoke more or less Portuguese with a little bit of an accent. So I was asked to go to Brazil, and I've been there in the Americas since, mostly working across South America. So
what have you liked the most?
I like that it's a growth market in many ways. I know the last few years have been tough, but still the type of projects that we do of transformation, building companies, have been much more interesting than what I was being exposed in Europe at the time.
That's great.
So I think it was a positive change for me.
Of course.
And as you mentioned, I'm Portuguese, right? So we are in the middle of Portugal versus France. So I hope everyone sends positive thoughts for Portugal playing against the world champion. It's not easy.
Sure, will do. Well, André, thank you. We have like 40 minutes of really pure magic in this session. For the audience, we're going to cover topics from the most relevant trends in LatAm right now to digital transformation, to talent. So please make yourself comfortable. Really, one of our biggest motivations at Reservamos as to host this type of sessions is to touch on the topics that push the boundaries of thought in the ground transportation industry. So I think on the first topic that I want to cover is the top trends in LatAm right now. And André, you have led such an interesting career, like in and out of multiple industries. Yeah, talk to me about the biggest trends that you're seeing right now, and if you can relate them to digital, that would be great.
Sure. No, I think the digital is one of the main topics happening now across LatAm. It's a very interesting moment for LatAm right now. It's on the one hand, you have this region that has so many opportunities for disruptive business models. We have so many sectors that still have a lot of pain points that could be addressed by the proper use of technology and data, both on the side of consumers and on the side of businesses. A lot of those points are really related to asymmetry of information, lacking of price transparency and price accuracy, the informality that all of these markets still have, a lot of it, and even the limited access that some part of the population doesn't have to services and products, for example, credit, that if we are able to price better, we can give more access to a lot of the population. And the bus sector and the ground transportation really faces some of these pain points that could benefit from a more technological and digital approach.
Yeah.
At the same time, the region itself is very large. So it can afford to have some scaled businesses with sizable addressable markets, which makes it very appealing to build these new companies. Just in population, it's twice the size of the population of the US. It's a younger population, and it's the consumers in the region are very early adopters of technology and innovation and services. For example, in Brazil, penetration of internet is above China. In India, the use of social media is one of the biggest in the world. Penetration of smartphones is higher than the penetration of the population itself is more than one per person. So it's a fertile ground for those types of innovation.
Yeah. So and sorry, like I wanted to interrupt you on two topics that you covered there. I think one of the first concepts that you alluded to comes to this idea of just giving more transparency of information, and it reminds me to like the thesis of a serial entrepreneur named Rich Barton, who has founded Expedia, Open Door, and Zillow, and really he quotes it as the power of the people, where like the internet actually surfaces information that it's previously very hard to get. And by shedding kind of light to that information, like you create a lot of externalities. So it would be great if you can kind of give us a few examples of where you have seen that happen and how you can relate that to the bus industry today.
We have seen that. I completely agree with you that transparency of information that technology allows, in a way, really allows the consumers to make better choices on how to spend their money. And it has a transformation impact in several industries, especially in a lot of them closer to us and closest to the discussion here, related to the tourism industry. From what we all saw happening in hotels, if I think 15 years ago, when I was doing Interrail across Europe, that I would go knock on the door of the hotel to see how much each night would cost me and how much I could afford and where I would sleep that night. I'm sure that that doesn't happen anymore to whoever is going to do Interrail across Europe post-COVID. Yeah. So I think that's a great example. Another one is urban mobility, where the pricing of a taxi was many times a black box when you get into the taxi, and you didn't know how much it would cost. And now with the transport apps like Uber and others, you can quickly see at least an estimate of how much that ride is going to cost and what options that you have. So that really has enabled
surfacing
new services and the consumers to spend more in some of those services.
Yeah.
And I think that the ground transportation bus industry is not there yet, but it will happen. It will come. I think, for example, in Brazil, a lot of the tickets are still bought at the bus terminal, where the price comparison is not as easy, but the consumer expectations are changing. That I have no doubt about that, especially post-COVID world. Young consumers, even older ones, all social classes, like I was mentioning, penetration of smartphones very high in Brazil across the different social classes. They are used to buying the several products and services in their smartphone, and that they will change the way they want to choose their bus company. And how do they compare prices of that? And that change in the buying profile of the clients of the bus clients companies will require them to adjust to that reality.
Completely.
And that will require them to adjust their pricing models, I would say, if the local regulations allow, because they will have to be more flexible, quicker to adjust, to respond both to competition and to manage utilization. And probably pricing at these companies will have to become a little bit more centralized also. So the way to think about pricing will have to change as a consequence of what you were mentioning, which is the price transparency in a way.
Yeah, and you know, like we are Reservamos as that, like we are powering a lot of the direct channels of a lot of customers. We're seeing that there is a massive kind of redistribution of like the channels, of the sales channels of a ticket. Definitely online, we've seen growth of 100% year over year, while the overall industry is growing at a mere like 4%, just kind of going along with inflation. And so it really kind of goes to the point that you just made, that as like the ticketing goes online, like there will be tremendous opportunities coming up, and that will bring a lot of challenges of information. And then I think the second point that you mentioned,
that penetration should even accelerate in the end, because people got more used to doing things online and digitally with COVID, and that bus industry will not escape from that.
Completely. And look, the second point that you were addressing was regarding the infrastructure. And so if you look at like, in my mind, in order like to really have internet scale businesses, you need to secure actually like two pieces one would be the front end, which is the applications that we use every day. And then kind of in the back end, you have the payments and the cloud infrastructure. And I think the piece that was lagging in terms of adoption and acceleration throughout Latin America has been always the payment side. I was looking up numbers, and checking account penetration in Latin America is still around 50%. But in the past year, we've had a massive kind of investment into a lot of fintech companies, and one of them is from a fellow Colombian in Brazil, Nubank. No, so I think if you can you shed us a little bit of light of what has been happening in the fintech sector and what that means like for the internet businesses.
Sure, I think it goes a little bit to the point that I was mentioning before, that the more you use technology can also leverage to give more access to different services and products, and credit is one of them, our payment instruments, which is, as you make it easier and you have more information about the users, you can also increase the penetration of those services. So that will continue to increase. It has been increasing a lot. It should even accelerate now with, for example, in Brazil, open banking, or in Brazil, the instant payments that has been launched. And the instant payments is also another example of something that Brazil is, or South Americans in general, but Brazilians in particular, are very early adopters of technology. So these solutions that come online get adopted very quickly. Instant payments, Brazil is probably one of the highest adoption rates in the world. Oh. True that the people find creative ways to use it a little bit as a Tinder, as a way to try to do romance with that, because the Brazilians are very, very creative. But the reality is that those things are getting a lot of adoption, and it'll be one barrier that will be gone and or severely reduced, and will enable the adoption of a lot of these services. Another barrier that is relevant for e-commerce, which is the part in logistics, that is also something that troubles a lot the region, will not apply to services. So services really can have a quicker adoption.
Scale. Interesting. And in terms of that quicker scale that you mentioned, I think one of the concepts that still blows my mind, and having been in the internet type of business for almost 8 years, is really the velocity or the speed of doing business. And I think this is like very often misunderstood in static or tradition, or what I would call like traditional industries. And I think one of the most powerful ways to have like a great business to get to scale, like in the internet, is to get to scale faster than others. So it would be great if you can like share us, like, what have you learned of the importance of speed on creating a digital or internet business?
Sure. So scale is going to be important, and you need to grow fast to get that scale. Scale is going to be important also because a lot of these business models are easy to replicate, to be honest. And it becomes a little bit of a race of getting to the user first. And so to get to scale fast, to get to funding, to be able to, I don't believe that most markets will be winner takes all, but there will be clear dominant players. And as such, to really go up the curve of adoption by clients quickly, it's important.
Got it. And then something like that still happens today is that I think like you speak, like we when we speak to executives in the bus companies today, you have two types of executives: one that are really like on the forefront trying to innovate, and then others that are really sitting on top of like a very big business, like what I would call cash cow, with slow growth, 4% year over year, of course, over a big base. And in my mind, I kind of think of it and said, like, is the industry really stuck in an innovator's dilemma trap? And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that sense.
What I think is these traditional industries, and the bus companies are one of the traditional ones, are often the main victims of digital innovators, especially if they feel too comfortable that their market is protected by regulation. So they feel comfortable that they won't be attacked. And what we've seen is that that's not a limitation. The taxi business probably would feel very comfortable, protected by regulation, and we know what happened to that from there. What I think that the bus industry felt a little bit more comfortable is in the order of priority of being attacked by digital innovators. They were not the first one to be attacked, but I don't think that was due to a lack of attractiveness of the industry itself. It was a little bit of timing of someone finding the correct tech-enabled business model to play in this market. Not sure if it already someone cracked it exactly, but there are more and more people trying and more funding going into that to try to capture that big profit pool. Most of the bus companies were very comfortable growing, often in their respective markets, did not invest a lot in their tech departments, which will put them at a delicate position to innovate, especially as the demand for the type of talents they will need to do that digital transformation is being very demanded across all sectors right now after what we've lived in the last few years. And those type of talents will migrate from an industry to the other. So it will be a challenge for some of those incumbents to do that digital transformation.
Yeah, and well, I think it is a challenge. I think that will I would like to flip the page and go to the topic of digital transformation, which you're addressing. I'm really, like, even though it's a challenge, I'm still a big believer that one of the biggest opportunities in the market today is kind of the deployment era of their internet, where traditional companies play catch up and capture like a lot of the opportunities of the online economy that today have been captured by mainly startups. I think we have multiple companies in the audience today that have engaged in digital transformation projects. And I was surprised of some research that actually Bain & Company published, where only 8% of the companies that engage in digital transformation projects reach their objectives. And so really, like, my first question is, why does that happen?
No, it has to do with expectations. So what is the initial goal of transformation, and then the ability to execute. It's not easy to transform a business model of a company. And several times we've seen that some companies delegate that, in a sense, to the tech department, instead of understanding that it has to be a business decision and it has to be a business transformation from which the tech department, the IT department, is an enabler. So it should be led by the business executives, and it's a transformation of the business model, and not just something that is led by the IT guys in the end.
Totally. Like, there has to be a lot of synchronicity in between the organization. And one of the, there's a biggest questions around prioritization of activities when facing like a digital transformation, because there's kind of a thought somehow that the more activities that you start at once, like the better the better outcome you will have. And I think like, from our experience, like, that's not necessarily true. So how, like, if you were the CEO of one of these like ground transportation groups, like, how would you prioritize your activities?
No, so I think the world right now is in constant digital transformation and with a lot of disruption happening. So this is less about having this the whole plan of what you want to do in the next 12 months, but it's having the compass, the direction of where the world is going through. Be very clear on what you want to differentiate on, and start to go in that direction, and being very clear on you have to try it and you have to adjust quickly, fail and adjust. So it's not about doing a big plan and then the prioritization of everything and then spend the next 12 months doing it. It's deciding which is the path and what are the differentiators you want to have, what is the digital transformation of your business, and then learn and try and learn and go about it that way, instead of just trying to.
And you know, that's a very different mindset from what a lot of bus companies have been accustomed, because Think about if you're kind of in the position of a CEO of the company, like still before, like you have to think of hard assets, no? And so the planning of the acquisition of buses, of your fleets, no? Then building terminals. And so those type of projects and decisions are very long kind of term, and then the execution takes a while because of the physical nature of it. I think in the internet, like the main difference is that you can test something in a day. And so like how do the organizations, like the best organizations, the ones that do not fail, organize themselves to be able to like take advantage of like the new dynamics of the online space?
I think there's two ways on the points that you mentioned. One is they have to be comfortable failing, trying and failing different things, and learning quickly. Also, not waiting too long to get feedback of the different initiatives that you're testing, so you can test different ones. The other aspect on the points that you mentioned is that they need to start thinking of ways to be a little bit more asset light. So perhaps you don't need to own all the assets. Perhaps you can do partnerships. You can do leasing of some assets, things that allows you to try and pilot different initiatives without having to be a huge capex plan from the get-go, that you have to commit everything.
Interesting, super interesting. And then often like there's also the misconception in the industry. There's a big myth that if you implement like an agile team within your organization, it will just trickle throughout the rest of the organization. But I think I've personally seen a lot of companies like just kind of adopt agile methodologies and kind of modern IT within the IT department. But if that doesn't trickle to the commercial department, to the marketing department, like it just does not have the impact expected. And in our previous conversation, you argued that it really, like the magic happens when there's the intersection of agile, talent, and architecture. Can you kind of explain for the audience here what that means?
Yeah, so agile in the end is not a silver bullet. It's a tool, a methodology that you can use. Some companies are doing it a little bit because of the buzzword without knowing what it is. And agile is not recommended for all situations. It can be super useful in product development, but it will not be for your accounts payable department in the end. Modern IT depends on agile, but agile alone is not enough. Companies need to synchronize their progress on agile with their efforts to modernize their architecture to be able to do some of the things they want, a little bit what you were alluding at the beginning, but also to develop new talent, because talent here is very difficult to get, and it's not easy to hire it in the market. So you really have to also know how to develop the talent you need to do that transformation in-house. And I don't think any company will be a leader in their sector if they cannot address all these three dimensions in a digital transformation. And it's what most of the big digital natives do.
Yeah.
And I think recognizing that it has to be the three things early on is important to have a successful digital transformation.
And I think there's little information about the architecture side of it, but really having like one of the benefits of having a very efficient and robust like tech architecture is speed, which we're making a point.
Speed and flexibility to try different things, right?
Exactly. And then I think before we move from the digital transformation side of the conversation here, I wanted to, I think given your deep expertise in M&A and private equity, I really had one final question of the impact of digital transformation on the market structure. And specifically, like, do you see like more consolidation in the ground transportation industry as a result of companies going digital?
Yes, I do. I think what we've seen it in other places, and I expected to see it here in the end, which is, I believe the innovation will put pressure on margins, both for price transparency and the investment that you have to do. Most companies will not have the financial health to survive a first wave of disruptors. They will suffer. The few companies that will be able to adapt and thrive in this new environment that probably will require lower EBITDAs, lower returns, will gain in scale in the end, and that will result in a more consolidated market environment. Having said that, I'm not super confident there will be a significant amount of M&A in the space, to be honest. I think it will depend on the regulation, local regulation, the value of licenses that can be brought to the table, but I expect a lot of companies will be pushed out of the market more than have significant mergers.
Okay, so to be clear, like you're expecting more companies, like both companies, to go under, and then basically like the largest ones or the most digital, like transformed, digitally enabled, like capture that market share that those companies that went under left.
Exactly.
Okay.
Which will in the end result in a more.
And then regarding this situation, like it's kind of a very deep like effect overall through the industry, and so I'm just curious, like what would you recommend the executives or boards like when you're facing this type of situation?
It's not easy, but I think that there's two big initiatives that the companies that want to survive and be in the market have to address. One is they have to prepare for a world that will be tougher in terms of results than it has been in the past, a bit like other industries went through. So that means a significant effort in costs position. The ones that will survive will be the ones that will be more cost efficient. And then on the side of the customer is really going through the digital transformation that will imply having a better customer experience, knowing your customer better, because there's also a trend of personalization, building loyalty programs, being more flexible in your pricing to increase utilization, which will be important in the cost part also. So I think there's those two legs that will be super important.
Yeah, and you know, I think another one that puts you like I think really like there's still a very bright future for the industry with the digital transformation, because a lot of externalities, like we just don't know yet of what would kind of happen if more and more of like the massive like passenger count that the bus companies have in the region go online. But I think to be able to capture those opportunities, still, like it's really important to not only transform the organization from a technical standpoint, but also from a talent standpoint. And that leads me to my next topic. So I think what is one of the biggest challenges that you see like in the market today regarding talent attraction in the bus industry or kind of in traditional industries that you have worked with?
Sure, I will relate here a little bit to Bain, because we also have a little bit of difficulty in the end, because a company like Bain, culture and talent is our biggest asset. We don't have equipment, buildings, anything. So we really have to invest in our people to become a great place to work, attract them and retain them. So this is super critical for us, given the specific profile that we try to recruit, and it's not easy to find. I think the same logic applies to several companies that are going through digital transformation, because the talent that you need to do that is scarce in the market, in very high demand. A lot of companies are really fighting for this type of profile, which is not easy to find. So they really have to think, how do they do to have a purpose for those working there that is not just a payroll at the end of the month, having a winning culture, work that people are pleased to go work in the morning every day will be important. Because let's be honest, for tech talent, I would not say the bus industry is the most sexy industry to go work in when you compare with education or healthcare that have this higher purpose. So how do you engage that talent will be super important and difficult. Although and perhaps some of those things you will have to do with outside providers.
Yeah, although I still believe that it is possible to make it like one of our internal sayings at Reservamos is that we need to make bus sexy again.
Yes.
And I think that like the analogy that you make with the type of culture that consulting companies try to strengthen is very interesting. I actually worked at a consulting firm in the past, and I remember there was a lot of intent on building the culture and building and creating an environment for the type of people that you want to attract. Can you share a little bit of like initiatives or what that means, for example, at Bain, for the audience?
We have different types of initiatives, but one that I think will be important for the companies to think going forward that we still haven't cracked. So I will share it here more in the spirit of everyone needs to crack it. Is the going forward, what will be the degrees of flexibility that you will give to workers in terms of work location, working from home, and or working from the office? Because I think this type of talent that we are discussing here is probably one that would be more affected by those types of benefits of degrees of flexibility, for example.
Okay. 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 So I think that there's really a lot of like food for thought in terms of culture and talent, and those types of transformations are the one that takes the longest. Another point that you mentioned in our previous conversation is that usually the technology team at a bus company is sometimes perceived as a support function, while a function that is really participating in the strategic direction of the future of the company. And so what would you recommend, and how would you kind of address the situation if you identify it is happening in a bus company today?
I think you need to bring them up to the where the decisions are made, because they will be part of the solution. I don't think it should be led by them. It has to be led by the business functions, but they should be in the strategic discussions from the beginning, given that they will be the ones that will have to help deploy that roadmap. And they have to be very close to the business functions, because they will be trying different things, and the company has to adjust very quickly. So it has to be a little bit more integrated than what we have seen so far.
Okay, but specifically, like what initiatives or what have you seen work? For example, have you seen like companies like integrate like a new board member that is very digital savvy or technology savvy into
Yes.
into the board, or like into their innovation committees? Can you give us some light on how that happens?
Yeah, so I have seen different models of different types of companies, from the model that you mentioned of companies bringing younger, more tech savvy board members,
Mm-hmm.
a board, from companies that have done full-fledged innovation committees. I think the model will depend on the culture of governance of each company, but the main point there is the discussion on tech and tech-enabled business models has to be had at the highest level of decision making within the company, which can be the board, but also a little bit at the level of the senior management of the company.
Okay. Okay. Very clear. So before we give it a close, Andre, there's a few questions here. One is related, like, how can the companies today compete better against digitally native companies such as Boozer or Flixbus, which apparently is going into the Brazilian market in the future?
I would go back to the comments that I did earlier. One, be prepared that those guys will come aggressive on price, because they're already doing it, that they will be doing it in other markets. So I think companies have to realize how lean they can be to be competitive in cost. There's no alternative to that. So that's the first step. And the other one is, how do you retain the customer itself? Instead of being someone that goes to the bus station and chooses at the moment, how do you gain ownership of that client building a relationship over time with the loyalty programs, a good digital experience for him as he books in advance, and that you gain ownership of the client itself, that you have his loyalty. I think those are the two aspects that you should think about.
So it's really, yeah, and I completely agree. I think in the end, the bus industry today has some certain similarities to the ultra low cost airline industry, where a lot of the metrics that are published are who has the best cost per kilometer to operate, and that ultimately can be a competitive advantage. But I think you can never like miss the customer side of it, and I really think that through better technology, through a technology adoption, you're going to be able to have better information of the customer, listen better, and be able to adapt faster to the changing consumer trends that are happening fast and fast. Well, Andre, I really find it extremely interesting to speak to people who lie just in the intersection of kind of investing and operations. And from my perspective, you at Bain, you breathe this on your day-to-day job, advising both funds and companies. It has been really like a very big pleasure to speak to you. I think before we close it off, I just have one final question. What really excites you from the future?
From the future, globally or
in general?
In the past industry?
Yeah, what excites Andre?
In general, what excites me right now is we are going through accelerated change, and change brings new opportunities. So profit pools are moving very quickly, and the economy will be transformed in several sectors, and that excites me to try to see what is going to be the future going forward at this pace of change.
Yeah,
and I think the region that we think is an emerging market, but I think it's one of where a lot of transformation is being had. The region is very creative in coming up with solutions for different programs. I think it will look very differently, the economy of the region, in 5 to 10 years. The winners, the companies who are in the landscape.
Yeah, and you like that hype, you like that change. So no, I completely agree. It's a very exciting time for Latin America. Just read the newspaper and you'll see all of the funding rounds that are being announced and all of the new services that are being created every day, and it's just very exciting. So no, Andre, really thank you very, very much. I just want to make a reminder to all of the audience, we have a conference coming up next on dynamic pricing and how you can maximize every seat through better pricing. So just keep yourself connected, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.